Welcome to another American Catholic History Conversation. I am Tom Crow.
I'm Northeaster Crow.
We are joined today by Father Richard Goodin. Father Goodin is the pastor of Holy Cross Parish in Holy Cross, Kentucky. Welcome, Father.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad we finally got this worked out.
Yes.
Yeah, we actually, the first time we met Father, we was our first Kentucky pilgrimage back in August of 2020. Holy Cross.
21.
It was 21. Yeah, that's right. It was after the pandemic had mostly gone through.
Yes.
But was Holy Cross it was on the schedule, but it was on the schedule a little bit later. We just stopped by earlier.
Yeah, so we were actually going to go to Loretto beforehand to the sisters.
But our bus driver missed a turn.
Yeah, our bus driver missed the turn, so we just kind of skipped all of that and headed out straight to Holy Cross, and it was great. Father gave us a great talk about sort of the history and the people of the area that we thought was wonderful, and that our listeners would like to listen to. So
yeah, so we've been working on it. It's a year and a half in the making, but here we are finally. So great to finally have this conversation, Father.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So Holy Cross, of course, was the first parish west of the Appalachians. Founded in 1792, the current parish was built in 1823. Current church built in 1823 on land that was given, or on land that was owned by Basil Hayden, who
Yes.
of course is one of the great grandfathers of bourbon. And if I recall when we were there, you were telling us about a recent restoration you had done in the church. Could you just tell us about what you've done to, like, what you went back to and what prompted all that?
Holy Cross is a parish wherein I hadn't been there that long when I met y'all, when you came through. And Holy Cross is a parish wherein I think that they look to Father, and Father says, "Hey, what do you think?" And they're like, "Yes, Father." "Okay, Father. Thank you, Father." And so they like things that I've come to know over the last year and a half, year, 3/4 as their pastor. They like things, might say, old school. And so they looked at me and they thought, considered me, and then they basically sheepishly, one of them asked, "Can we put the communion rail back?" And I'm like, "Well, where is it? Like, where is back from?" And they're like, "Oh, it's in the basement, in the cellar, kind of up underneath the floorboards." And I'm like, "Oh, so is it all there? Can we just bring it out, clean it up, put it back?" And they're like, "Well, we think. And so we dug it out and looked at it, and we had about 65%. But we had enough to go on. We needed a chunk of marble, probably got broken, and lost and thrown away. And then we needed a whole bunch of, I guess what you call spindles that kind of adorned between the rail and the floor. And a bunch of those had probably just been broken in the tear down, I guess. Well, when they tore it down, they also put in on top of this small tiles, these little green and white tiles, very lovely, but it got covered up with carpet something like 4 times. So there's a tremendous amount of carpet glue. And we thought, well, we'll get rid of the mauve. I believe that's the technical term for that color, mauve. The untechnical term is ugly.
Yeah.
And so we got rid of the carpet to uncover where the communion rail was. And find the holes and stuff to realign it with. And then it took us about 4 months of 3 retired gentlemen in the parish scraping the glue off of the tile.
Wow.
We thought, well, the tile is chipped here and there. We might have to rip up the tile. That tile is constitutive of the church. It's got like 4 inches of concrete and wire meshing under it. It's never going anywhere.
Right.
And so we thought, well, we'll cover it up if it's with white oak hardwood floor, if it's too far gone. But it wasn't. It had a couple of spots in it. Most of the spots were where the communion rail was. And so once we uncovered those, reattached everything, lined everything out, got some pieces fabricated for it. A very generous lady over in E-Town. If you look at it on the map, they'll call it Elizabethtown. We call it E-Town. E-Town, Kentucky, found out that she's a marble person in the cemetery sort of thing. And she found out what we were doing. we were calling around looking for marble 1.5 inches thick, and the standard these days is 1 inch, apparently. So it's very hard to find. So she was so ecstatic that we were redoing the communion rail, good Catholic lady, that she donated it for us, or to us, and fixed it up, perfect size, pretty good color match, etc. And very thrilled. So we got that piece. That was probably the most expensive part of the redo. So it took a little doing, but buildings that are 200 years old have lots of stories to be uncovered. That one did. So it's such a simple little thing. It seems like to just put something back where it was. Ended up being about probably 4-month project. And then once we shined up the floor, we liked it, so it's there. We didn't cover it up. And then when I got to looking at it, the green and the white in the floor, there wasn't any green or in the walls. It was all just whitewashed. And the altar pieces were all just stark primer paint white.
Yeah. And
so we said, we need to splash some color in here. So I got a hold of a local artist who was overly humble in her skill set. And I gave her the task of embellishing with some colors, some accent colors, the high altar pieces, the two side altars and the high altar piece with some accent color. And a lot of that was green, which was found in one piece of art underneath the tabernacle, or right underneath the altar in the tabernacle, like a Last Supper piece, and lots of greens in it, much like the color behind me. And so we ended up putting accent color all over everything, and then painting a Sacred Heart of Jesus on one side and Immaculate Heart of Mary on the other side of the altar. And then we trimmed a lot of it in gold paint. So it definitely pops off the wall now. It really is rather beautiful. And then I put an inscription on it. Well, I have her painted in there. But I used the Carthusian motto. The cross stands as the world turns. I'll butcher it in Latin, but it's in Latin on there. Now in gold lettering. It's beautiful. And everybody's like, what? And I'm like, well, why that motto? We're not Carthusian. I'm not. There's a Trappist abbey nearby, but so why Carthusian? Well, the church is the Church of the Holy Cross, and the area is known as Holy Cross, and their motto is the cross stands as the world turns. Mm-hmm. And hardly anything has changed in that town since that church was built. Like nothing. And so it just doesn't change. The families don't change. The history stays the same. They do the same sort of stuff. I mean, they have electricity. I think AT&T has pulled internet out there to at least 2 houses. But it's, and so I think the motto fit really well. And I wanted to make my little impact that, and my notion as pastor putting that there, with the implication that I don't really think it needs to change that much. Let it be exactly as it is. And so we've been renovating touch by touch, piece by piece, putting things back. So
that's really awesome. And what you said touched on something that at least I found so interesting and sort of different than the way the world works these days, is that the same names that were there at the founding of the parish are the same names that you will see in the graveyard, which we were able to walk around in the graveyard when we were there. And that was actually really moving to do that. And then the same names that are still in the pews at daily mass and Sunday mass now. And that's not the way the world works now. Like, I'm from Massachusetts. I lived in Washington, D.C. area for 8 years. Now I'm living in Ohio. None of my brothers and sisters live in Massachusetts anymore. Like, we're so mobile, to have an area where it's so grounded and rooted is just amazing and so different.
Right. The cemetery surrounds the church like this green wall surrounds my head. It's all the way around is the church. You have to walk, or the cemetery's all around the church. You have to walk, maybe 65, 75 yards through the cemetery to get to the front door. So we're not all that handicap accessible, but we've been here 175 years before that concept was even thought of.
Right. So
you can drive a car up to the door if need be, drop somebody off, but it is a small walkway, and the cemetery surrounds and out back the cemetery. It's rather full now too, after being here 240 years. full of people, and we're getting ready to expand it where an old school used to be. We're going to build a more modern section of the cemetery so that these big families who became accustomed to being buried all next to each other, who had plots of 20s and 30s all side by side, we can't do that anymore. You have to basically be buried where an old tree died and used to be, because those were the pockets. And so now we're going to open up a cemetery on the other side and do it probably a little more modern construction, wherein it'll be in squares, more easy to identify, more easy to locate, and more easy to access for the big equipment that digs the graves now, rather than very scattered about. And the rows aren't very nice in the old side. So that's a touch of modernization, so that, to your point, these big families that still exist here, these handful of names that came from Maryland. You can go to cemeteries in Maryland and see Mattingly's, Lyons, let's see who else, Livers, Blandfords, Metcalfs, all those early folks who came out here in the 1780s. You can see they left their family in the graveyard, and they brought the ones that were alive to the far, far, far west, which was at this point in time pre-Louisiana Purchase there in central Kentucky. I mean, that was the West.
Yep, absolutely.
And so when they landed there, they wanted to do the same things that they had done back then, back home, meaning be Catholic, farm, and stay together as family. And they did that mainly through putting that church there and securing the sacraments there, begging priests to come out there, setting up that parish, and then and they're still there. Like the same family lines are still there.
Yeah.
And then the handing down of property is getting cumbersome now because of the different ways probate and such happens, and the different ways, wealth transfer happens. It's not as simple as it once was. So a lot of the family farms now are getting broken up. A lot of the family farms will sell off like 15, 18 lots on the front of their farm, road frontage, and they'll build little houses there, or rentals. So there's more places to live, but that breaks up the farm. And the farms are being, so basically after 240 years of being around here, things are shifting to where it might not be as stable in the future with these families, but a lot of them will go away to college, and then once the farm comes up for sale, they'll come back and get their chunk. They'll hunt on it or visit it or put up a RV place or something and come back to it every once in a while. But then it seems to be around retirement age is that a lot of them come back out with their wealth, build a house, renovate the old farmhouse, etc. So there's not a lot of young people there, but the family lines still continue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So also in that cemetery, I remember the graveyard. I remember two other things. One, you had mentioned that the first Trappist. So the Gethsemane was founded in the 1850s, I believe. Gethsemane Abbey, not too far from.
Yeah, round two of the Trappists.
Right, round two, because round one came out in like 1800, 1805. They were fleeing, well, essentially the French Revolution. But the first establishment didn't take, and some of them died, part of why it didn't take, and they're buried in your graveyard. Correct.
They're buried. There's signifiers of their burial there on marble stones, but those marble stones, I can walk over and pick them up and move them at the moment. So we're working with our cemetery committee to put them in a proper fixed place. And so tracking that down is tough because that's in the old part of the cemetery. And a lot of those monuments you can't read them anymore, or they've been broken and piled up in an area, And so it's just the consequence of time, really. But these monuments are there, but they now sit on the outside altar. The big crucifix and altar is in the back at the spot of the original altar of the original log church.
Okay.
So it's sort of behind the current church.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had mass there on All Souls Day. And outside, we had a good crowd. Folks really liked that. And being the site of the original church, being the site of some of the earliest graves, being those markers are there. And of course, the paters get their names listed and the brothers don't on that particular monument. And so it is very modest, but the Trappist graves are very modest, especially over Gethsemane even now.
Right.
So they're there. That's some of the notable early ones, but where exactly, I'm not so sure.
Yeah. But it's still very moving for me. That was one of the most moving parts of the pilgrimage that we did when we were there in 2021, was being there and those original Trappists there, and then going to St. Rose and those original Dominicans who were buried at St. Rose. And it's hard to find the words to describe what it feels like to actually, you're like, oh yeah, it's nice, they're the original, but then you're just right there in that place where these people made those sacrifices, so that, you know, now it's like, of course we have all these orders here and we have all these people who, you know, it's much more normal, but for them to have been there at that time, like you said, in the wilderness at that point, you know, establishing the faith.
We were the far west, but you had the first and second Trappists here who retained in the second incarnation. You had the first Dominicans still over there at St. Rose. The Dominican sisters followed with their college, it's gone defunct, but their mother house is still there. You had I would argue the first, but that'd be a fine point of argument, domestic women's religious in the United States, the Little Sisters of St. Mary at the foot of the cross, I think, the original name for the Sisters of Loretto. And I think that their paperwork was being processed to be founded before Mother Elizabeth Ann Seton's was, but she was a little closer to the action and got her founding first.
Right.
I think the sisters were established before those sisters, etc. So it's a matter of sort of documentation. They're old and they're still out here. You have First Jesuit College out here in the Wild Wild West with St. Mary's College, and then they got a letter one day as they do, and said, you'll be moving. Your entire faculty will be moving to reinforce the school in a city because we're not interested in the new country in developing country colleges. Even though you have a thriving one now, we will be selling it to the resurrectionists, giving it to them, and you will be taking your entire faculty to a city school in New York, aka Fordham, that's failing. And so that moved from out here, went to reinforce Fordham, and it's still there. And so and then it became one of America's first private prisons. Irony is thick there. So those are just some of the religious orders. And then you have Sister of Charity of Nazareth, not too far from here as well. So those are your religious. Xaverian brothers were out here early on, founded St. Joseph College, or kind of school for boys. So there's a whole lot of the early firsts out here. And then, of course, the attendant parishes that were founded by all of them, and the missions and the schools. Even Gethsemane had a college for boys at one time, even though that's totally out of character for Trappists. But they needed it for the local church concerns. So they had it for a little while. It did burn, I believe, is what kind of killed it in the end.
Wait, no, that's different. Was that Thomas Aquinas?
No, the Thomas Aquinas Seminary was over at St. Thomas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
the original seminary where Bishop Flaget and some of the early priests were. And then, of course, speaking of early priests, first priest ordained in the United States, Stephen Babbitt. He was out here for a long, long time. Him and all of his very, shall we say, enthusiastic and contrarian ways.
Yes, he's one of my favorites. So
we would refer to him as a pistol. And so, and he's got some relics over at the Mother House. And then, of course, Father Charles Nerix.
He didn't make it.
Father Charles Nerix he is the missionary version of the Curé of Ars.
Okay.
They went through the same stuff. They hid from people trying to stop them from being educated as priests. When they were priests, they hid from, the politics of the day, who didn't want them to say mass, who didn't want them to teach and preach. And so as both sort of hid and both basically eventually made their way with their priesthood, you had the curé of Ars stay put pretty much where he was born and raised. And then you had Father Charles Nerix, who launched to America and came over here. He was one of the best Latinists in the whole New World. Apparently he read and read and read and read, and he wrote very, very well, etc. And yet he was out here where, these brand new churches were being born. I mean, we think of missionaries who go to Papua New Guinea or something, and how different that would have been. But for him, he was doing that here at one point when this was the far corner of the world.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous story, if you'd like to hear it, about his building of Holy Cross Church back to Holy Cross.
Yes.
The answer to that is yes. We have not yet. He's on the list for episodes. We haven't done his story yet.
There is a book that I have that I don't know the title of it actually, because it's got rebound at St. Mary's College, the one I mentioned, in their bindery by probably some seminarian who got punished and had to go work in the bindery or something. And then and it's missing like the title page and like the first 8 or 9 pages. So you just jump into the story, and this is where the book where I read this story. So he was building churches around. He had already established the Sisters of Loretto, and he was very busy with their sort of continuing development. And so he got appointed to be the pastor of Holy Cross. And Holy Cross had that log church for a long time. It had burnt, and he was the pastor, and he was charged with building a new church. So him being a very outgoing, forthright, get it done sort of priest, and a very burly man himself, he apparently was working with the men of the parish out in the logging operation to secure the logs for said church. And so you can see the proportion of Holy Cross Church, and it's 200 years next year. The proportions are most definitely limited by the timber sizes that they could work with. You can tell that by looking at like St. Joseph Proto Cathedral over in Barstown was a little bigger. But they probably had either better timber skills or bigger equipment to utilize the timbers. But the timbers were all from right nearby. So they would have been working right in the area. And there were teams of horses drawing the logs out of the woods over to the church site. And that's where the story takes place. So he goes over and he's like, why in the world have we stopped? We need to move. This wagon needs to be down in there where we need logs. And so he was basically forcing the situation, wondering why things had slowed down. Because here he is walking up the hill to the job site, and everything stops. So he's not happy. He's very upset. And they're like, well, Father, the mules, they got spooked. So they're calming down. They're calming down, Father. And then he was like, well, move them. Do whatever you got to do. Get them moving. So he was getting upset, and they wouldn't. The mules wouldn't move. And so, but the wagon was loaded, and it's like, oh, it must be overloaded. So unload some of the logs. Like, no, Father, I think they're just spooked. Just let them be. Just you go join the men up on the hill there, cutting down trees. So he went up there, and then apparently one of the logs rolled down the hill and went right in front of the team of mules. And he's like, well, now they're, we need to get down there and get them out of the way. They're already spooked. So he goes down there and he says, we're going to move this log and move the log. And they're like, oh no, the horses are still spooked. Leave them alone. And so he gets really upset. So he walks out of the distance and comes back, and they hadn't moved it. So he moved it himself. He just pushed the thing by himself. And then he's really frustrated. And as the story probably is, for just get to the point, Father. So then he goes back up the hill to join the logging crew. And all of a sudden, in the quiet, he hears at top volume an expletive yelled out. And the mules, boom, right down the road they go. So he was like, So he runs after the team of mules, stops the carriage, stops the mules, and yells at the I don't know, what do you call it, driver, to get off and on his knees beside the wagon. And you're thinking, what in the world? He said to him, he says, you must confess the sin of yelling that expletive out, and out here in public in front of all these people. You're just a bad example. And he was like, "Oh, sorry, Father. It's what got him motivated." He was like, "No, I get it now. You wouldn't call out that word because you've trained those mules to only go on that word."
Oh my gosh.
So they were trying to not offend Father's pious ears. And when Father understood the circumstances, he made the man confess that he had trained his mules on a expletive curse word.
That's fantastic.
So that story comes down through the books from Father Charles Nerix. Apparently, he was a very active pastor with his people, and he wouldn't stand for any form of impiety in public, in his presence or whatever. And really, as far as the book goes, that's kind of where it drops the story of the construction of Holy Cross Church. So that anecdote, and then I tried to figure out when they dedicated it specifically and what the circumstances were. And the best thing after that I can figure out is that Father Nerix was very big on having a relic, for a significant relic or work of art for the church when it was dedicated. So he would travel back and forth to Europe and acquire these relics. So he had a relic of St. Charles for St. Charles, named after his patron, that he built over there. And then for Holy Cross, he got a relic of the True Cross, a rather significant piece, which is in a reliquary on the altar at Holy Cross now. It was hidden in the back of the sacristy, so I keep it on the altar now. Especially, you want something holy on your altar. And then opposite that relic is a first-class relic of St. Pius, Pope St. Pius X. So quite a combination there at Holy Cross. So, but he acquired that relic for Holy Cross, and it's in a very large cross reliquary. And so that's pretty much all we know of the that I can find at the moment of good details about the actual 1823 construction.
Right.
So we're hoping to have, if I can dig up some more research or have someone who's already done the research, some come and give a talk during our anniversary celebrations. We're going to have a big dinner for the parish, celebrate 200th anniversary. Going to do some more embellishing of the church with paint and sacred art and things like that, to remember this 200 years old. By the way, I forgot to say that when we tore up the ugly carpet and did that, there was a problem with a basic sacrament of the church. Nobody wanted to go to confession because it was held in the side sacristy. And if you go in there and drop a matchstick, you could hear it all the way in the front of the church. And so it just wasn't conducive to nobody. They were hesitant. So I said, well, where was the original confessional? It had to be in here somewhere. And they said it was on the back wall back there where the Sacred Heart statue is now. And then, and by the way, Father, the Sacred Heart statue used to be in the sanctuary. So I moved the Sacred Heart statue to the sanctuary, and I built a confessional in the back. And it looks like one of the side altars. So the front piece of it is exact replica of the same cabinet shop that did the high altars when they put those back in the late 90s. The high altar pieces up the wall. And so it looks like it's been there forever.
Yeah, so, we have photos from when we were there. I'll put some of those in so people can see. At least has much changed since in the past year and a half? Has much been added?
Was the painting done of the Sacred Heart and the Immaculate Heart when you were there?
I don't remember.
Probably not.
We were there in August of 2021. So I think a lot of these things weren't done at that point. So I'm looking forward to going back.
Yeah.
By this point, I will have spliced a bunch of photos in so people will have seen the photos that we took. So this part of the conversation is moot for anybody who's watching the video.
But yeah, so we are going back in August next August.
During the 200th anniversary celebration, we're very excited about that.
Yes. So I don't know when your actual celebration is, but
we're going to do the party and a large mass and everything on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. Will be September.
Right. So we'll be there right about a month before that. We'll be there in August.
If I can get my ducks in a row, we have the church is always open. But let me define what that means. The church is always open. It has the original front of the church was a brick wall and had a door that would go right into the church. Well, sometime after that, they extended out from the brick wall a tiny little stone room. And that stone room has another set of doors. Those doors don't ever lock. And then the inner doors on the original wall of the church are glass doors, kind of like your, almost like a storefront glass door. And so you can always visit Holy Cross. Anybody can always drive up, walk through the cemetery to the church door and go inside that first door that's never locked and view the church. Because I don't live there on site. A priest hasn't lived there on site for a long time. I live in the next parish over. It's like 3.5 miles away. But, and so that's our way of sort of being able to accommodate tourism without actually being there and having the church open. Now we have masses there throughout the week. So the and Eucharistic adoration, and of course church on Sunday, etc. Funerals, unfortunately, quite regularly. So it's open a lot, but I go by there all the time, coming and going, and there'll be someone, you know, touring the cemetery, or looking in the glass door. So there's always that availability for anybody who might be coming by.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
We will, excuse me, we will be there on Tuesday, August 8th.
Well, that's our current plan.
That's our current plan. Yeah. So pencil it in.
We'll be in touch.
You should go to St. Rose on that day. That's, I believe, St. Dominic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, you're right.
It is. And that actually is our plan. So our plan is Loretto, Holy Cross, and Maker's Mark in the morning, and then St. Rose in the afternoon with Mass at St. Rose. So yes.
That is the plan.
Perfect. But yeah, we're super excited to go back. Now, speaking of the history of Holy Cross, actually curious, do you know why that was the name that was chosen, or is that that's just what it was?
The anecdotal thing that I can come up with and kind of piecing things together, how cultural things go out here. Everybody has a nickname, especially the men at nickname. Crazy nicknames. Very interesting. I don't know, you got to ask each one of them, how in the world did you get that name? Like Hog Face or something like that is the guy's nickname, or Braino, or Shunt. I mean, all these strange things. That's what they call them all day, every day. And so it's a nickname culture. And so the Father DeRowan, one of the early priests that was there, he apparently went up the nearby hill. We call it Knob, K-N-O-B. Probably the most prolific way that is used anymore is the Bourbon Knob Creek. Yes. So that would be a creek coming down a knob. So the nearby knob at Holy Cross is the largest elevation knob anywhere around here. You can see it from ever away on a clear day. And it is the highest point. So probably the original settlers saw that, or as part of their deed, that find that big high point you'll be able to see forever away. And that's where your property, the deed that you hold is. And so not at the direct base of it, but about a half a mile away from the base of that knob is where Holy Cross Church is, sort of still on the downslope down toward the creek that runs through there would be. So this large hill, Father DeRowan apparently got some men together, and they went up the knob and they erected a holy cross. So they put a cross up there to sort of mark the territory for our Lord, and to sort of announce the presence of the Catholic people in this area, Catholicize it, etc. So that got up, and then it got restored over time as it would sort of deteriorate or whatnot. But there's still the structure. It's still up there, and there's 3 crosses now. There is whoever owns it lights it up during late Advent and Christmas time. But you have to go up the hill with gas and fill up the generator gas can to run the lights, because it's so far up there's no electric, I believe, and that's the story. And so over time, I think what happened, there's a cross up there now. So the hill had the cross, and it was a holy cross, right? And so now the hill has a holy cross on it. Now the hill becomes Holy Cross. Hey, let's go up see the cross at Holy Cross. And then all of a sudden that nickname sort of creeps down the hill into the area, and the area is now called Holy Cross. And then it creeps into the entire area that's at Holy Cross. And the original church was the Chapel of the Sacred Heart.
Mm.
But when it burned and Father Narings built the new one, he named it Holy Cross. So it's now that church, the second church, gone. It didn't become the new Chapel of the Sacred Heart, or the Church of the Sacred Heart. He named it Holy Cross because that's what everybody already called the area anyways.
Mm.
Makes sense.
So
Yeah.
seems to me that's the logical way the anecdotes would fall out.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. It's just so interesting how, sometimes it's just like somebody liked it, so that's what they chose. But then you have these other histories.
Someone's patron saint or something like that. But
Yeah. But going back to Knob Creek and the Bourbon, interestingly, Basil Hayden was the original owner of this land when those 60 families came out from Maryland, but he's not buried in the cemetery, and we're not sure where he's buried, right? Is that correct?
That I don't know, but I was tidying up after Mass about 8-9 months ago now, and a lady comes in, and she's like waiting for me, at the door. And I'm like, ma'am, can I help you? You want to walk around? You want to hear about the place? She's like, oh, I know all about it. I was just hoping to talk to you, Father. And I'm like, what's up? She says, I'm Basil Hayden's descendant. I'm like, well, hot dang. And so she told me all about being related and all the family line and all the history of her family and this and that. And they're from California, and they want out of California, which sounds sensible enough to me. And then so they were thinking about coming to Kentucky, and they were basically visiting sort of their things that they visit when they come around. And they were looking for property at that time. I don't know whatever happened to that, but there was a descendant of Basil Hayden there, and she was darn proud of it and wanted to make sure that the local pastor knew about it. We have a picture back in the sacristy. It's a copy of the original deed. I don't know where the deed, I don't know if it made it through the fire that happened there or if it made it to the courthouse. Of course, our county name changed several times before it is what it is now. So I don't know where the record would have been from that ancient day of, 1780 or 90, whenever that deed would have been formed. But we have a copy of it, and the copy plainly states that Basil Hayden had this property, and he's deeded it over to the Roman Catholic bishop of the area. And it may have even been done when it was the Roman Catholic bishop of Baltimore.
You're right.
And so I think that was probably, probably had to have been. And so to build the church. So that might be on file in Baltimore, which would be an interesting archive search.
Yeah, because Bardstown was 1808. I'm pretty sure Basil Hayden was dead by then. So it would have had to have been Baltimore. So.
And the deed says it's from this white oak tree 22 paces to the hickory tree and 97 paces over to that elm tree, etc.
Yeah.
And so as part of the 200th anniversary, I have it in mind that to take the deed and get a rough ballpark where the first tree was and try to plant trees close to those paces as we can.
Right.
Reconstruct that ancient sort of deed.
That would be really cool. Yeah. Yeah.
What's another historical thing for people when they come to visit, to be able to say something historical, but also something to walk and look at, an attraction, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So
yeah.
Cool. So you are, to talk about you a little bit, you are from the area yourself, if people hadn't heard the accent already. And you don't have to get really deep into your story, but I know you told us some interesting things just about the area and then your own family and your experience growing up in sort of this very Catholic part of Kentucky.
Right. Recently we in the Archdiocese of Louisville got a new archbishop, and the archbishop has had the good favor of visiting with all of his priests. And he no agenda, just 30 minutes to talk. And I'm like, I didn't come prepared, so I guess I'll just start at the beginning. And so I said, my family came, first ancestors in the mid 1600s, and showed up in the Pennsylvania area, and eventually did their thing, got into the military, and then one of them got noted in the military, and he's enshrined in the second verse of the song Yankee Doodle Dandy, and Captain Samuel Goodin. And apparently that figure received a land grant to come west, and these people wanting to buy these deeds to go west, but there wasn't much military presence, and Kentucky was never a sort of an Indian hotbed of living. It was more of a hunting ground. And so they sent out, whoever they were at the time, I guess the federal system at the time, sent out some military people in the form, one of them of my grandfather's, this Captain Goodin. And he came out just north of New Haven, kind of between New Haven and Boston, Kentucky. If you looked at it on a map now, of course, those names would have been there. There was nothing here at the time. And so it was a confluence of two rivers and set up a fort, Goodin Fort. And then the Kentucky historical, drive around, see a historical marker scenario. There's a marker there. You can read about it. And he set up a fort there. And just after that is when the Maryland families came down as the 60, as you noted, and kind of came into that area and felt a little more secure, perhaps. And then, so my family's been here a long time. And we ended up coming to where the Catholics were and settling. And then another part of my family came from Ireland who wanted to come to the area to work in the whiskey industry. And so eventually with whiskey, one of my Irish grandfathers had a label called R.J. Cummins, and that's my first name, and his name is the same, Richard, so I'm named after. And R.J. Cummins, his label, Mr. Cummins' label, went really well, and then he did so well that he got invited into a bigger group, Bardstown Bourbon something, and then he didn't like working for other people, so he went back to his little Coon Holler Road, literally named Coon Holler Road, and it's still here. It's right next to the cemetery at St. Vincent de Paul in New Hope, which is the next town over to the west. And so on Coon Holler Road, he opened up a distillery again, thinking as an Irishman, he loves this country. It's a great country. And these stupid rumors that they're going to end alcohol, never. In this great country, never, never, never. And so he doubled down on his distillery, took out some loans, built, everything was going great. It was gangbusters. And then, of course, Prohibition came in, and they lost everything because they were overextended. And so, of course, they took what, inventory they had, and so thus ended the bourbon industry in my family line. But then the Goodins maintained local business ties. They were in coal, they were in construction, and eventually settled on manufacture of hardwood floors. And so my dad, and I kind of grew up around that, and my dad still, he owns his own company in hardwood flooring manufacturing. So somewhere in the line, when that Irishman got into the family line is when my family from Wales became Catholic. My mom's side of the family was Scottish, always had been Catholic. And so the Catholicism in this area has been from those, late 1700s, and the Irish coming in only helped bolster that, density of Catholicism. And then, of course, the other French and Belgium and all those influences. We have a very traditional and I would say more French Catholicism out here. Flaget and all the early priests, Father Nerings was, of course, Belgium. And so we have a lot of those seeds that are still here. So when you get the flavor of the architecture of the churches or the flavor of devotion of the people, I think you get a lot of what looks French. And you come around the corner here on these curvy roads, and then there is the church up on a hill above a creek, in the perfect spot, the best property in town and the highest steeple. I mean, a little wine and cheese, and you would think you might be in France. And so it is a very traditional Catholic area with churches everywhere. My parishes of Holy Cross and St. Francis have no other denomination of Christianity in them, nor any other religion. So it's just the Catholic Church. And the two parishes south of me, same way, and the parish southeast of that, same way. There's just nothing else. And so I grew up in the county seat in Lebanon, Kentucky. And there, of course, the Presbyterians apparently founded that town and named it Lebanon because there were cedar trees along the creek bed there. But this the county seats a lot more people and sort of a lot more commerce, and there were a little bit bigger diversity of religion. But Marion County, one of the last statistics I saw, it was still majority Catholic. And it's only one of 2 counties in what I think you would kind of call the Civil War South, outside of the Gulf area, that would have been majority Catholic. Here, and then where would the other one be Davies County, Owensboro, Kentucky, on the river, south river from Louisville. So very Catholic. I came up, and I would have a couple of Protestant friends in like Boy Scouts or something, but I went to Catholic school, and just it was a Catholic thing. It was Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know when we were talking before, you mentioned about like there's pluses and minuses to that, of course, because you have just this Catholic culture everywhere. That's what people are. But then that also just leads to people they're just Catholic because that's what everybody is. But you still need the evangelization and the catechesis and the way to get people sort of more connected to their faith on a deeper level. So I'm actually curious about that. What are you doing? What's happening in the area to bolster the connection to Catholicism?
You're right on. My time, what little time I've spent working and knowing priests and religious in Mexico, or my time spent one summer in Italy trying to learn a little something about over there, the language of Catholicism. It is very similar to those cultures wherein you got all these churches and everybody's Catholic, but you go to church and nobody's there. Mexico, Italy. I think that's the most depressing part about visiting Italy these days. Go to a parish church in Italy somewhere outside of a tourist area, and this won't be hardly anybody there.
Right.
Not the case here so much, but where it'll be full during the mass times. But there's 3 masses a weekend in my parish, wherein there used to be 8, and they were all full just a couple years ago. And the children count on average in the 50s out here was somewhere north of 12 children per family. One family had 21, same parents. Several families have 18. I have one of my daily masses sometimes will have 6 people from the same family of 18 siblings.
Wow.
So, but then they grew up, working hard on the farm and all that. But then they get married and they have, 3.1. So in one generation, they went from like a gaggle in a family to 5.
Yeah.
And then now, for some reason, people my age and a little younger have the understanding that they're not supposed to, have children until they're financially stable at age 37, And so it is rapidly declining in practice, both in worship and in morality in the family. And so one of my tactics is I just keep asking the question. I keep telling the story. I keep reminding people, do you not realize that just so long ago, there were 18 of y'all in one family? And then now what? So I keep posing the question, reminding them the history of who we are, where quickly we've come from, and sort of quickly where we're declining. And I keep it not as like to be Father Debbie Downer, but to be realizing the situation at hand, sort of know the enemy, be able to maneuver. And so one of the tactics that I use is, and knowing the sort of the settledness of Catholicism here, I don't think novel programs work. I don't think YouTube short videos to catechize people out here work. So we teach the children from the Baltimore Catechism. We teach the children, very practically speaking. We have religious education. We have multiple times a year where they go to confession, and it is very rote. It is very memorized. They have a method, and so they become very familiar with it. And so we build in the same type of traditional and standardized forms of interacting with the faith, so that they actually have content in their head. I think that part of what happened here in the 80s and 90s was like, yeah, you're Catholic. Everybody's told you that, but you don't know anything of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And so the catechesis was sort of vacuous. And it went from grandma and mom and dad always reinforcing, praying the rosary and all that stuff. Always going on feast days. Every kid had a names day. Every kid was named Mary and Joseph. And so those practical things fell out. Now they're named Hunter or something like this. And then they Hunter and Stephanie are real popular names. And so you get a very huge swing. And then those things that would always reinforce the faith aren't there anymore. But they're told they're Catholic, you know? And if you ask them to raise their hand, are you Catholic? They'll say yes, but their presence belies that. And so so some of those things that I'm trying to bring back, just like they asked me to bring back the communion rail, trying to bring back traditional forms of worship, traditional forms of catechesis, traditional forms of piety. So we have Eucharistic adoration multiple times during the week. We have Stations of the Cross. We need to develop some Advent themes and stuff like that to get people back at the church more often. It's the parish hall is still the center of sort of social life in the town. The grocery store, the tiny little grocery store, or the restaurant, you know, let's say you can gather 35 people there for something. But here, you can gather 445 people at our parish center. So it is the center of things, even if people who come to certain activities here haven't been to church in 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's still very much in the mind because they've been told, but the other side. So, so I'm trying to keep the tradition of the church alive because it is stuck here for 200 plus years. And I don't think novelty is going to work. So,
no, I think that's great. And I love the idea you're talking about the church being the center of things. I think one of the problems sort of outside of where you are, but in sort of bigger areas, is that the church did used to be the center of social life as well. And now people's connection to church and to the people that they see at church is really, well, you go to mass. Well, mass isn't a great time to socialize and to create those other things. So the more the churches have lost that ability to also provide a social hub, the less they've been able to hold on to, I think, people. So I think that's a really great thing that you have that ability to do that.
Right. We have a big event every summer at Holy Cross. Well, we have 2 events at Holy Cross that bring people in, and it's the picnic season, which is May, June, and then the turkey supper season, which is October, November out here. So your churches you can go on a circuit where the picnics, that's fried chicken, and games and outdoor stuff. And then in the sort of the fall into the summer, you get the turkey supper circuit. And then everybody, you know, gets to talk about who has the best grade. And so these 2 things bring them in. And we have the first of both of them because we are the first church. So Pride of Place, we have the first to kick off each season. So we get a lot of the upfront enthusiasm. So what I've been doing is putting parish money into our parish facility, like the gathering space, the old school, which is the parish hall, and freshening it up, because that's where people are going to come interact with us at these festivals, at these socials.
Yeah.
So that's how they're going to see there hadn't been anything done here in 75 years.
Right. Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they see it: fresh paint, fresh air conditioning, fresh bathrooms, fresh kitchen. There's life. People do this to their home all the time, every 10 years. So why don't we do it to keep it fresh, to keep it interesting, to keep it looking nice, and being involved in have a threshold of social environment that actually people want to socialize in, not just a 1952 school.
Exactly.
And so this is one of the very physical ways I'm trying to revitalize. But I did all the church renovation stuff first, because that's first and foremost. And then now on the social side, trying to show people that we're not a bygone, dead thing.
Yeah. Now, your other church of St. Francis. And I recall you talking about some problematic ways that church was changed a number of years back.
Mhm.
Is a renovation or a restoration of that one in the offing as part of this process?
Yeah, St. Francis is in St. Francis, Kentucky. How about that? So if I pull it up on my phone on the weather, it'll say St. Francis. And so it too used to be named, it was named Chicago, but the mail from Chicago, Illinois kept coming down and kept annoying the postmaster because it was so hard to get it back up to Chicago, Illinois. So they voted in town to rename the town after the church.
That's hilarious.
So this is the type of people we got here. And so but somewhere, one of these fanciful, enthusiastic, short-sighted, excited priests, associate priests, post the Second Vatican Council, got in his head that he needed some men on a Saturday morning, and he told them bring sledgehammers, crowbars, shovels. And they're like, oh, we're doing some work at the cemetery, probably building a wall or moving something for the rectory, something Father needs. So they come up there, and he had a bulldozer there the day before to dig a big hole in the cemetery and kind of right out the sacristy door across the parking lot in the cemetery. And he proceeded to say, all right, boys, knock all this stuff down, take it out the sacristy door and dump it in that hole over there.
Yeah, this story is just as painful the second time.
Yeah.
It really is. It's just,
I think some of them were pious enough that they took some stuff out the other side and kind of set it over in the bushes. And that stuff has remained in Grandma's house and stuff around town. But most of the high altar pieces, which were the largest in Marion County, they're stunning if you look at the pictures and the difference. And they just knocked them all down, and then put them outside. And some of it survived, some of it's made its way back. So now instead of 3 altars, there was just a movable tabernacle on like a cabinet top in the apse with a gigantic crucifix that the cathedral church in Louisville didn't even like, so they just shelved it. And then somebody from down here got that crucifix and brought it down here. And it's like a 21-foot tall crucifix. And the corpus on it is kind of misproportioned. I think it's why the cathedral crowd didn't like it. And so it was hanging there in the apse to replace the gigantic high altar that used to be there. And then, of course, the little, as some famous podcasters call it, the IKEA table altar out front. And so what we ended up doing before me, with the pastor before me who died in office of cancer, kind of came on real fast and ran him down. He bought an old altar from Wisconsin that was for sale out of an old church. And instead of the high altar that would fit at $70-some thousand, he bought the side altar at about $8,000. And he brought it down, and it never got installed because he got sick and he declined and died. And then eventually I got assigned there. And then so just like the other place, they said, hey, will you put back the communion rail? These folks said, please, can we install this altar in Father's memory? And I'm like, sure, shoot it. And so we put it in. It took about 20 men and some very country rigged up equipment to get it in and installed. It was plaster of Paris material, is plaster of Paris. And so it was quite delicate, and we got it installed. And I was convinced at one point, being the skinniest of the bunch of the men working, they made me go up behind it and make sure the bolt that was to go into the wall fit. And being the skinny man in the room, I almost had the high altar piece that goes up the wall fall on my feet, and that would have I would have been feetless. And so it was pretty scary. So I think I put it out on the line to get that altar in, and we got it in. And it's I purchased a statue with the help of some parishioners of St. Francis of Assisi that I really liked. And it's him staring like in this fashion at the crucifix in his hand and has a skull at his feet. And I really liked that. It's very old, and it was from the time frame of the altar was from the time frame of the late 1890s, which is when the church was built anyways. That's why the pastor selected it. And so we installed the statue, and I got some Ancient of Days and refurbished candle, high altar set of candles with a crucifix. brass and marble. They're beautiful. And so after about $25,000, it now looks like something of what it used to. We still use the regular sort of Vatican II altar as well as in there in the church, and some statue of Joseph and Mary and some votive candles on either side where the old side altars used to be. So there's some symmetry back. It still now needs some embellishment, like the whole apse could do with some kind of wallpaper texture, stencil, something. And so, and then we have some rugs in the sanctuary to make it look a little more classy. Yeah, so it's coming back alive too. We moved both choirs from being in front, in sort of sing-along mode, or more concert mode, back to the choir loft. And so that took a little explaining of why we're doing that, but I think by and large it's better now, and people really like it. And certain volunteers are more comfortable singing up in the choir than they were singing in front of everyone.
Yeah.
So it's in the history means something to folks out here, and it's not something that's dead to them. It's something that makes sense. And when the pieces have gone back in place, it's giving an opportunity to explain why they were there in the first place, and the coherency and the logic that goes into it, and the architectural nature of each piece and all that. And people are like, oh, rather than the movable furniture.
Right.
That they didn't understand why this week it was here and why next week it's over there.
Yeah, and from the choir's perspective, like, look, the church was built so that you'd be singing from up here and you wouldn't need amplification, and it projects properly. People will hear you better. It's like, oh, okay. So,
indeed, at the Holy Cross, I celebrate the Mass Ad Deum, because that church faces south, so it's not Ad Orientem, east but it goes south, but to the altar, and I don't need a microphone.
Yeah.
I don't even have to try that hard. It just hits and goes. And same with St. Francis, because it's curvature there. It's so much.
Oh yeah.
More coherent.
It's how they were built.
And batteries are expensive.
Yes. So, well, that's a lot. No, that covers a lot. This has been great, Father. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We look forward to bringing another group of people down to your neck of the woods in August.
Yeah, we're trying to make it a yearly thing that we're going to go down with a group of people and let them see the amazing history that's there, the feeling of just like I think I said before, that the sacrifices that people made to make sure that the faith was planted, was firm, stayed strong in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And you can read about it, but there's just nothing like actually being there in the middle of it. So really excited about heading back and getting to visit and bringing some more people there.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people wouldn't imagine that we would have such Catholic history, right? In central Kentucky, as you made a point earlier. The 3-county area right here that we're in, that you'll be visiting, Nelson, Marion, and Washington County, is very dense with Catholicism and its history and its institutions. Even Louisville, even though it's the seat of the archdiocese now, even though it used to be out closer in Bardstown to out here, even Louisville, it has lots of parishes, but the institutions that are out here, the monasteries, the nunneries, the cemeteries, the all that, even a seminary at one point, 2 colleges. It is, I think it's very, very rare, very rural out here, and very, so it doesn't get messed with a lot, but it also has gotten forgotten.
Yeah.
And so I think your all's efforts to bring that focus back, that it does exist, and that if we let the secular people mandate how this part of the world is colored, it will be as the place of bourbon, and that's it. We'll stop.
Yes.
But this was primarily because it probably got its bourbonness because Catholicism was here, and Catholics were okay with a drink every once in a while.
Yeah.
And so, but outside of here, up in, for example, but a different place, but proves a point. I think still Jack Daniels down in Tennessee, I think the county is dry, but here they produce all this whiskey. That was never the case here. And so it was part and parcel of what was going on. I think that gave rise to the development, the hyper development of the craft of whiskey making down here, because it was sort of culturally and religiously accepted and used as recreational. So but if we just let the secular forces now color this part of Kentucky, it will be just the bourbon place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
So
that's not even half the story.
when we talk about, we want to take people on this pilgrimage to Kentucky, a Catholic pilgrimage to Kentucky. The number one question is, there's Catholic stuff in Kentucky? Like, yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it's considered, it's the South, so it's Protestant. People just have no idea about that, just how deep and rich the history is. So we really enjoy telling that story and hopefully bringing more people along. So
if you'll let me, as quick as possible, a thread between the South, Catholic, and national impact. A man named John Martin Spalding was born nearby in Calvary, Kentucky.
Yep.
Little town. The church my grandmother grew up in, she grew up right next to it. And he's got a plaque out front. Well, he grows up, becomes a priest, becomes one of the bishops of Louisville. And during the Civil War, and of course, Kentucky didn't choose a side, but was quickly under martial law. And then all of a sudden, the Archbishop of Baltimore needed to be replaced. Well, there was a northern candidate and there was a southern candidate. The Vatican at the time favoring the French entering into the war over here, the skirmish, the war of northern aggression, perhaps. And then so they favored a candidate from the South. John Martin Spalding got the nod and goes to Baltimore, which is still in the South. And so that was an international diplomatic decision for that appointment. And he, even though he had his sympathies, were decidedly with the South at that time. And so, but he got a very delicate position in the country for the Catholics of the era during that very interesting time. And he's right 10 miles from here.
Yeah, Spalding, we haven't told his story yet either, but no, Spalding is a very interesting, very important character in the history of the church in this country. The way he navigated those waters with, after the war and during Reconstruction, and then having the Council of Baltimore, trying to get the bishops, because the Catholic bishops coming together in Baltimore immediately after the war for the next provincial council was a very important step that the secular authorities recognized. I believe President Andrew Johnson himself went to that council to basically compliment them and thank them for this example of the North and South coming back together, being a model to other parts of the country. So and Spalding was a huge part of that. So Spalding is he's a great one.
So that'll be chapter 92 of my book, All Roads Lead to or Come From Marion County, Kentucky.
And we will promote it.
Most definitely. Definitely.
Very good.
So, well, one other thing, I don't know, a little minor. One other thing that I encountered in Kentucky when we went, that I'd never seen before, but I have seen since, was a host maker from, I loved it. It was so cool. A host maker from Bishop Flagey in his cabin. They have one of those. Never, ever thought before I went there, how did they make hosts back then when they were?
Right.
And we saw
Bishop Shepherd's host maker up in Maine. So I've now seen 2 of the 5 original bishops host makers.
Yes.
So I'm on a quest.
Yes. You'll see host makers from all the original bishops.
Yes.
John Carroll, you're up next.
We need to get that, whatever it looked like, whatever pattern it was, and start producing them out here.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was very cool to see that. So. But thank you. We're looking forward to seeing you in person in August, and with hopefully another group of people.
Yeah.
So, speaking of, you were talking about your dad being a hardwood floor and whatever. Well, Tom's parents came with us on our first pilgrimage. They're coming with us again, and Tom's dad is a cabinet maker.
Yep.
So Tom grew up with all of that kind of woodworking and equipment and everything also. So,
but then I cut off the finger and decided to go into storytelling and marketing.
So I've got all mine yet.
I've got them on this hand. Just had a little mistake on that one. So, but such is life.
So
very good.
Very good. So, well, thank you so much for giving us your time and telling us all about this history of a small but very, very,
Very
important
important.
place.
Yes, indeed. So, and we'll see you in about, what is it, 9 months?
Yeah.
10 months?
Well, yeah, more like 10.
Yeah. We'll see you in about 10 months.
All right. I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, Father.
Peace.
Thanks.